Recently, there has been a lot of rhetoric in the online beauty space asking this question of, are eyeshadow palettes dead? I have seen this question asked over and over again in the beauty space, especially recently, because up until the past few weeks, we haven't seen a lot of big eyeshadow palette launches. There really hasn't been anything that has caught at least my attention, and I know a lot of people out there are like, is eyeshadow dead? Is no one using eyeshadow anymore? How come we haven't seen any exciting palettes coming out? If you're a real one and you've been in the beauty community for many years now, you know that this was just a trend cycle. Eyeshadow palettes were not dead. Eyeshadow palettes will never actually die. In fact, some of the most exciting launches this holiday season are big eyeshadow palettes. So no, eyeshadow palettes are not dead. If you thought they were, you are absolutely mistaken. We have so many really exciting palettes that have launched lately. I want to talk about them with you guys. I have a few of them here to show you guys. Let's talk about the hits, the misses, my thoughts on them. Let's jump right into it. Let's talk about the most exciting launch first, at least the most exciting launch in my opinion. This is the new Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes palette. We all know, love, and probably own the original Ethereal Eyes palette. This really beautiful, neutral, slightly verging on warm toned eyeshadow palette. This was one of Makeup by Mario's most exciting palettes he's ever launched. So this year, he decided to launch a similar palette but in a different color scheme. You have got the Ethereal Eyes Moonlight palette. So this palette, as you can see, similar to the last one, has similar beautiful scattered shimmer textures mixed in with mattes. And as you can see, this palette is way more cool toned than the original. Putting them here right next to each other, you guys can see the original Ethereal Eyes palette, which is this one over here, way more neutral, if not warm. And then the Moonlight palette is more of your traditional smoky eye palette. I mean, this palette has your gray tone neutrals. You've got a little bit of warmth with this color right here, but you've also got a dark blue, a black, gray shimmers, some goldy shimmers, even this shimmer, which is actually a pearly white to almost a blue duochrome shift. The shimmers in this palette, absolutely stunning. They are that classic kind of thinner scattered shimmer texture. They're just lighter on the eyelid. They don't really crepe up, but they give such a beautiful, almost wet shimmery look. This is the palette I'm wearing on my eyes today. Today's the first day that I've tested it out. So as far as my first impressions on it, the mattes are very blendable, as was the case with the original. In fact, some people argued that the mattes are almost too blendable in this formula. If you sit there and blend and you apply too many mattes on top of each other and try to get a really defined or structured look, it's not gonna happen with these. These are so blendable to the point where the shadows can get muddy if you overwork them. So with a formula like this, I highly recommend just applying maybe 2 mattes, 3 maximum, but I would say 2 is your best bet, and then pop a shimmer on and call it quits. If you're trying to do intricate looks, this probably isn't the formula for you. However, just in terms of the color scheme, I'll be honest, I think I will still get more use out of the original Ethereal Eyes palette. I don't wear cooler tones as often as I wear more neutral or even slightly warm tone shadows. And while some of the shades definitely go more gray in this palette, I overall still think it's wearable for a tan skin tone. It's just not my preferred color scheme. That's just my personal preference. However, I do appreciate that the shades in here go darker than they do in the original. You can see in the original Ethereal Eyes palette, the darkest shade was this brown, which to be honest is not that deep. So the fact that the new palette actually has a black and a deep blue and a dark brown, I mean, you can definitely get some depth out of this palette. If this is your color scheme, if you prefer a more traditional smoky eye, cool toned palette, I think you will really like it. To me, it makes sense because it's not a replica replica of the original palette. It is its own unique new palette. And if Makeup by Mario was going to introduce another Ethereal Eyes palette, to me, it had to be different enough. And I do think he did the job. I am really happy to have that palette. But moving on to a palette that I'm kind of 50-50 on. This is the new Huda Beauty Icy Nude palette. From what I've heard through the grapevine, this is going to be Huda Beauty's last large scale eyeshadow palette, which is kind of crazy because Huda Beauty has really capitalized on this style of palette. In fact, this was Huda Beauty's first product that ever launched the brand. If you guys weren't around when Huda Beauty launched, I did a video on the original eyeshadow palette. I think it was called the Rose Gold palette. Could be wrong on that name, but I do remember doing a review. I wasn't impressed by the packaging, but the formulas were really pretty overall. So this is kind of a moment in history. The fact that Huda Beauty's not planning on doing these kinds of palettes anymore. It's like whenever Decay discontinued the Naked palette and then relaunched the Naked palette, who the heck knows what they're doing. But anyways, as far as this Icy Nude palette, I think it looks pretty, but does it look like something we haven't seen from Huda? Not at all. At this point, Huda Beauty has too many of these neutral palettes. I feel like I have 3 of them already in my collection. I definitely don't need this one. Objectively, is it pretty? Yes, it is. But again, you can see it is a cooler tone neutral palette. There are quite a few gray tone shadows in it, which like I said with the Makeup by Mario palette is not my favorite tone on me. I will always prefer to go more pink or rosy than I will prefer to go gray. And also I do feel like the palette skews very light. That is one major critique I have with these kinds of big palettes. Natasha Denona tends to do it as well, where they will release a palette of a ton of shades and the majority of them are light to light medium. And then you might have your 1 or 2 token medium deep or deeper shades. But for someone with a tan complexion, I need at least 1/3 of the palette to be deeper. Otherwise, I'm not getting the depth level. All of these light tone matte shades and even the light tone icy shades are gonna look the same on me. And it's just not worth it to me to have a whole palette of just light to light medium colors, which to me is what this is. I do think, however, if you like the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette, this is giving I Need a Nude to me, just Huda Beauty's version. So do I think that it's a bad launch? No, I think it makes complete sense. I think if Huda Beauty was gonna capitalize on one last big palette, this is probably what they would do, considering the success of the I Need a Nude palette. This makes total sense, but is it for me? I don't think so. Speaking of Natasha Denona, she has a new eyeshadow palette launch. Surprise, surprise. This is the new Roxa palette. I'm gonna be so honest, based on the outer packaging of this palette, I really thought we were getting a duochrome masterpiece out of this. I thought this was gonna be sort of like a relaunch of her trichrome palette. Depending on who you are and your makeup style, this might be a win or it might be a lose. This is essentially a relaunch of the original Natasha Denona Lila palette. That was her purple toned palette, and it is pretty clear at this point that Natasha Denona is trying to do more of these smaller scale palettes. These 15-pan palettes used to have full-size eyeshadows in them, and they used to cost over $100. And now that Natasha Denona has downsized the actual shadow amounts that you're getting, she's able to sell these for under $70, which is still an expensive palette. However, it's not $120. You know what I mean? As far as the color scheme of the Roxa palette, first off, that marbled color, I think it looks pretty, but I don't know if it's just me. When I saw the marbling, for some reason, it kind of looked a little juvenile for me. Like it looked a little early stages of ColourPop Super Shock shadows. It was also giving like Wet n Wild baked shadows. There was just something about it that just didn't look high end. However, putting aside the look of the marbled shadow right in the middle, if we're just looking at the palette as a whole, it looks like a pretty purple palette. I mean, if you need a purple palette or want a purple palette or you love purple eyeshadow, I think this is really pretty. For me, I'm kind of split on this. Like part of me really wants it because I do think objectively it looks gorgeous. There's a nice amount of mattes, there's a nice amount of shimmers. Natasha Denona's formula is usually just A+. So a big part of me wants this palette and wants to try it. Do I need it in my collection? Obviously, that's another story. I definitely don't need it. I don't need a full purple palette like this. While I do love wearing purple eyeshadow, I know I'm not gonna get the use out of this like I would with something that's more neutral toned, just because in general, I've been reaching for more neutral eyeshadow looks. I also haven't been doing super complex eyeshadow looks as often. I tend to reach for 1 or 2 eyeshadow shades and call it a day. And a lot of times those shades tend to be more neutral. So in terms of purple, I don't know if I need it, but am I tempted? Absolutely. Speaking of large eyeshadow palettes, this one is large and in charge. It also comes with a price tag, but this is the new Danessa Myricks Lightwork 6 eyeshadow palette. She calls this the Freedom Palette, magnetic, customizable, stackable palette with illuminating pigments for eyes, face, and lips. Danessa Myricks has released a Lightworks eyeshadow palette every holiday season, clearly for the past 6 years now. I have a couple of these in my collection already from years past, and to be honest, I don't get the use out of them that I would like to, particularly for this price tag. This palette is filled with gorgeous, shimmery, duochromy eyeshadow shades. They are stunning. Danessa Myricks quality across the board, incredible. I've tried a lot of different formulas from Danessa Myricks. I have encountered a few duds, but 9 times out of 10, her formulas are so amazing, super unique, very innovative, and the Lightwork eyeshadow formula is gorgeous. To me, it performs like a really beautiful, intense indie duochrome eyeshadow, something kind of similar to like a Cleona shadow. I like incorporating mattes into my look. None of these palettes typically have mattes. I also don't reach for duochrome shadows as often as I used to. So even with that, I know I'm not gonna get the use out of this palette. Again, I think it's probably a gorgeous palette. I haven't swatched it myself, but based on years past, the formulas tend to be really nice. But for me, this is definitely gonna be a pass. I also do hope and wish that future Danessa Myricks holiday collections have something a little different, a little unique. I feel like we've done the Lightwork thing now. I mean, this is turning into an Urban Decay Vice palette thing. Like, we've done it, we've seen it, we've done it over and over again. At this point, we're getting the same thing, just repackaged, repackaged, repackaged. I want something new. I want something different. I want something interesting. So I'm kind of hoping this will be the last Lightwork palette we see from Danessa Myricks. Not that they're bad, but I feel like at this point, if you wanted one, you got one before. If you have one, you probably don't need another, and you probably don't need this one. So those are my thoughts on this palette. I have very similar thoughts with the Pat McGrath holiday palette this year. I know I rag on Pat McGrath often on my channel. I feel like for more of my channel now, I have kind of been a Pat McGrath hater. And it's not because I don't like her products. It's not because I don't like her formulas, because I do. I really do. Again, I was there during conception. I was there purchasing Pat McGrath when she was still packaging stuff in those sequin bags with the crappy e.l.f. packaging. Like, I was there from day one. However, I am kind of sick and tired of seeing holiday collections, and especially these mega palettes from Pat McGrath. I'm tired of it. I feel like we've seen this already. I feel like I have this palette already. I own this. This exact palette came out a couple years ago, I swear. I don't know. This one is called the Luminous Legends Mega Eyeshadow Palette. I'm tired. I'm tired of this. Nothing about this palette is interesting to me. I don't like the color scheme. I don't like the layout. Some of the shimmers look really appealing. Some of them do, but overall, it just looks like a muted rainbow palette. Or I guess let's call it a neutral palette with a few pops of color. That's what this looks like. I feel like every Pat McGrath holiday palette has been that. And again, I'm ready for something different. I'm ready for something new. None of these holiday palettes ever have the really impressive, really beautiful Pat McGrath shimmers. Those like baked shimmers that just look like freaking disco balls on your eyes. None of the holiday palettes contain that formula typically, so I'm not expecting any different out of this one. I just feel like, yeah, I feel like a Pat McGrath hater. Like, I don't like this palette. I have it or I have something very similar to it and I don't need this one. I want something new, Pat McGrath. I want something new. Next holiday, I don't want to see the same collection over and over again. I don't want to see this stupid packaging. I want something different. I really do. Okay, let's talk about something I was fully getting ready to talk trash about. This is the new Urban Decay Moondust palette that is exclusive to Ulta. Urban Decay released 2 Moondust palettes. There's a quad at Sephora and then there's this palette that is at Ulta. This was not something that was that interesting to me personally because I have a handful of Urban Decay Moondust shadows, and as much as I love them, I just didn't feel like I necessarily needed any more. And when I saw this palette, which this is one of those palettes that kind of slides open like that, when I saw the colors in here, I was like, okay, there's only 3 Moondust shadows and then there's 3 matte shadows and they're all insanely neutral. What do I need this palette for? I genuinely was like, I don't need that. And then Urban Decay sent this to me in PR, so I was able to try it without having to actually make the decision on whether or not to buy it myself. And I'll be totally honest, this palette is really nice, okay? This is the type of palette that I have been reaching for lately. These are the types of eyeshadow looks I have been doing. As boring as it looks, this is kind of my perfect palette at the moment. You've got 3 matte colors, all of which are beautifully usable for my skin tone. You've got a transition color, you've got a darker color, and then you've got a lighter color. You've literally got the 3 mattes that I would need in an everyday eye look. And then you've got 3 distinctly different Moondust shimmer shadows. You've got one that's more coppery, you've got one that's a little bit darker and more taupe, and then you've got a Midnight Cowboy Rides Again. Just kidding, this is Space Cowboy Rides Again. I'm just flashbacking to my old school ways. Space Cowboy Rides Again. 3 shades that are actually really pretty. I mean, this whole palette is pretty. Is it basic? Absolutely. This is the pumpkin spice latte of eyeshadow palettes, okay? You don't need it. This is a basic B palette. But is this what I've been wearing lately? Yes, it is. Is this something that I will continue to be wearing? Yes, it is. So even though there are huge eyeshadow palettes coming out, like the Pat McGrath palette and the Roxa palette and the Lightwork palette, this is the perfect one and done for me. You don't need this, okay? If you already have some Moondust shadows or some of those scattered shimmer shadows in your collection that you already love, you don't need this palette. Pair it with a few mattes that you already have in your collection and you're good to go. This is not a need. However, if you're somebody that is like, I love the single Moondust shadows, but I would love to just have the perfect mattes to complement them, just my go-to one and done eyeshadow look. I don't wanna have to fuss around through my collection looking for mattes to go with the singles. Like, I just want a one palette, one-stop shop. That's what this is. This is your one-stop shop. If you've never used this formula, this is an amazing, amazing formula. And it's a great way to try 3 different Moondusts, easily paired with some mattes to actually get a full look. I do like this palette. Now that I've actually tried it, I will eat my initial thoughts. I'll eat my words on that because I really thought I was gonna rag on this palette, but I like it. I do see the appeal. I see why this was launched. I don't mind the star packaging. You know, it's a little funky. You know, it might not be what I would go for personally, but I like it. As far as the other Moondust palette Urban Decay released, this one is exclusive to Sephora and it's a Moondust quad. If you are just looking for the Moondust shadows and you don't want the mattes, you don't want to fuss around with all of that, you literally just want those scattered shimmers, I would look into this. This one is called the Moondust Space Cowboy Glitter Eyeshadow Quad. There are 2 Moondust shadows in this palette that are repeated in this quad, so keep that in mind if you're someone who just wants to collect all of them. Half of this quad is already in this palette. So, you know, unless you want duplicates, keep that in mind. Again, I know people are gonna look at this quad and think it's boring, think that we've seen this already. That's honestly what I was gonna say. But here's the thing. While I don't have this quad, nor do I see myself purchasing this quad because I already have the other palette, let me make a couple of arguments in favor of this. Firstly, I can appreciate that Urban Decay sees what is selling in their line. They see that the Moondust shadow formula is super popular and then that's what people people want to see, and that they are actually delivering on giving actual palettes or quads of just that formula and giving it in colors that we actually want. They easily could have thrown a bright blue or a darker green or a neon orange in this palette, and that really would have steered people away from this palette, you know, because even if 3 of the 4 are what you want to see, if it's not all neutral, like is what's selling in the line right now, they know that that would probably steer people away. And I think it would. I think that giving people 4 neutral Moondust shadows, or just like in this palette, making it look honestly boring as hell, but giving a full neutral palette with some Moondust shadows, it's what people want to buy. It's what people are buying. So as much as I can look at this and say, objectively, it's boring. We've seen this already. How dare Urban Decay? I also think it's what's selling, okay? I think it's what's selling because I think it's what people are buying. And yes, if you already have a handful of Moondust singles in these types of neutral colors, do you need this quad? Probably not. You probably already have it, or you have something very similar. You probably don't need it. However, for those people that want to explore the Moondust formula and don't already have a handful in their collection, I think this is a pretty good purchase. Okay, this one is a weird one for me, okay? We've got these Anastasia eyeshadow palettes in Sugar and Spice. 2 different palettes, 9 pans, again, fairly neutral across the board. Sugar is your cool toned, lighter toned palette, and then Spice is, I wouldn't say it's deep or dark by any means. It's more of your medium toned, slightly warmer palette. If I were to pick between the 2, Spice would obviously be the one I was gonna get, but if I'm being honest, neither of these is interesting to me. I think the theming is cute. I think the theming makes sense. Sugar and spice and everything nice. I get it. I don't know. There's something about Anastasia launches lately that have turned me off so much. I feel like her formulas have kind of been hit and miss. Her launches, the theming, nothing has been super interesting. Unfortunately, this falls into that bucket. This just doesn't seem interesting at all. It's been a while since I've been excited about an Anastasia palette, and that is really sad because there was a point on YouTube when Anastasia palette launches. I mean, that is what people looked forward to. That was the thing that made a lot of people's channels really popular. Modern Renaissance, Subculture, the Norvina palette. I mean, there were so many palettes that were so good over the years. And now here we are in 2024 and they're launching this. And this is just bland, boring. I don't like it. I like the idea of a smaller palette. That I do like. I like the 9 pan, smaller, more travel size palette idea. I definitely don't hate that. But there's something about the way this is laid out as well as the actual shadow colors that just don't interest me. I don't know. I don't know where that inspiration has gone, but clearly not into the palettes. Let's quickly chat about a few face palettes that are coming out during the holiday season. You've got the Hourglass Classic Ambient Lighting Edit palette launch. 3 different palettes, light, medium, dark. They all look pretty similar to years past. I'm sure the exact tones are shifted a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I think at this point, if you have ambient lighting edit palettes from years past, you have things that are very similar to these. I like the packaging overall. I really like that Evil Eye packaging. I think that one's really pretty. You've also got the Dragon palette and then the Lotus palette. The Lotus design is my least favorite, and that's also the palette that I would be the most interested in as far as the color scheme. It's the deepest of the 3, but I don't like that packaging. I don't like it. The Evil Eye packaging is really pretty though, but the colors in the Evil Eye packaging, I have them. I have so many ambient lighting edit palettes. I have really enjoyed them throughout the years. I used to do full reviews on them in years past. I mean, I do love them. And in fact, I still tend to reach for them from time to time. They make really good one and done face palettes because you've got a bronzer, you've got blushes, you've got highlighters, you've even got finishing powders in there. You've got a nice array of shades and of formulas, and the texture of the ambient lighting powders is just impeccable. But I don't need them. This year, I just feel like I I don't need them. And I'm happy to feel that way because these are expensive. Yeah, these are $90 now. So these are expensive. So I'm happy to say that I don't need it. We'll see how the future of Hourglass goes. And if they can release ambient lighting edit palettes that are just mixing up the shades, something new, something interesting, something innovative, I will be there for it. This is something I never saw coming, you guys. I never saw this product coming. I never saw the fact that I would actually be interested in this formula. I didn't see that coming. What a crazy time we live in that Ishani is actually interested in purchasing an ILIA product. This is the ILIA Ethereal Baked Face Palettes. They released 3 different shades or 3 different shade tones, which I really appreciate. There is a light, a medium, and a deep, and I actually think that deeper shade palette looks stunning. You've got 2 blushes, a bronzer, and a highlighter, and the actual colors, the actual color tones in this palette look like they would actually work for me, which is so impressive, especially for a clean beauty brand like ILIA. The bronzer looks dark enough. The blush tones actually look really promising, as does the highlighter. So I am excited to get my hands on this. This is gonna be my first ILIA purchase. I've never bought from the brand before. Nothing else has really appealed to me, but I saw this and was actually really interested in it, which is so shocking. That is so surprising. But even just the baked formula, it looks promising to me. And I like the packaging too. It's a really cool, really unique package. This is all the way around a really good launch. I'm shocked it's from ILIA. I am shocked, but I'm excited to try this. Okay, and then let's round out this video by talking about one indie brand that is and has been pumping out the eyeshadow palettes, but I wanted to give a really quick shout out to Glamlite. They are still on their horror grind, as I am so thrilled that they are, and they are releasing more horror collaborations. I'm a horror girly, you guys. I love Halloween. I love anything horror. I love anything scary, spooky, creepy. So they released their Halloween 2 collection, which has this big 15 pan eyeshadow palette. Again, it is more cool toned. It kind of reminds me a little bit of their Frosted Flakes palette that they had. Similar color scheme with the blues and oranges, but I do think it looks really pretty. If this wasn't branded as a Halloween collaboration, would I purchase this palette? Personally, no, I wouldn't. But you know what? It's okay to admit from time to time that the packaging gets you, the branding gets you, and the gimmick marketing gets you. And this one got to me, as did the other horror collaboration they're doing, which is the Trick or Treat collection. This is right up my alley, you guys. This is actually a color scheme that I could see myself using. I love that it's a smaller 10 pan eyeshadow palette, half mattes, half shimmers, all in that beautiful kind of orangey, warm, very fall autumnal tone. Oh, this looks so pretty. This palette genuinely looks gorgeous. If this wasn't branded Trick or Treat, I would still probably be interested in it just because it is the color scheme that I have been wearing and loving. I love how deep and dark it gets. You can definitely make this a really fun, beautiful, neutral, smoky eye. This is really pretty, and the fact that it's another horror collaboration from Glamlite is just the cherry on top. And there we have it, you guys. There is proof to you. Full video proof that eyeshadow palettes are not dead. Makeup palettes in general are not dead. They might have taken a little bit of a hiatus. We might have been like, oh my God, are we supposed to stop wearing eyeshadow? No, we're not. In fact, Natasha Denona wants us to wear purple, Makeup by Mario wants us to wear blue, and Danessa Myricks wants us to wear duochrome, multichrome, trichrome eyeshadows. So I am here for it. I am here for all of it. I'm glad eyeshadow isn't dead, because then, you know, more than half of my makeup collection would be obsolete. So there's that. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely stay tuned because we have some Sephora sale videos coming up soon. I hope you guys are excited about that. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today, and I will talk to you in another video very soon. I'll see you then. Bye.